double standard. Melissa adjusted her blazer and took a deep breath as she stepped into the bustling lounge. Her best friend, Tasha, had convinced her to come to this networking event, promising it wasn't just about business. "Girl, you need to let loose. Not everything is a corporate pitch," Tasha had said with a knowing smirk. Melissa scanned the room, her eyes landing on a tall man in the corner, effortlessly laughing with a group of people. His tailored gray suit fit perfectly, and his smile was magnetic. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing instead on the glass of champagne a waiter handed her. "Melissa, you made it." Tasha's voice cut through the crowd as she hugged her friend. "I want you to meet someone." Before Melissa could protest, Tasha had pulled her toward the man in the gray suit. "Dante, this is Melissa. Melissa, Dante." "Nice to meet you," Dante said, his deep voice sending a warm shiver down Melissa's spine. "Likewise," she managed, shaking his hand. For the next few minutes, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Dante shared stories about his tech startup, while Melissa talked about her career in marketing and her passion for storytelling. "I can tell you're driven," Dante said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But do you ever slow down?" Melissa laughed. "Not often, but maybe I should." "Maybe you should," Dante replied, his voice playful yet sincere. By the end of the evening, Dante had asked for her number, and Melissa left the lounge with a smile she couldn't shake. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text notification. "Looking forward to tonight. Hope you're ready for a little surprise." She smiled at the screen, curiosity sparking in her chest. Dante had been a gentleman since the moment they exchanged numbers, casual but intentional in his communication, making her feel like he truly wanted to know her. When he suggested dinner for their first date, he promised it wouldn't be just another dinner. Now, standing in front of her full-length mirror, Melissa smoothed down the emerald green wrap dress she had chosen for the evening. It hugged her curves in all the right places, but left enough to the imagination. She paired it with nude heels and a delicate gold necklace that caught the light just so. Tasha's voice echoed in her mind. "Girl, make him work for it, but let him know you're worth the effort." When Dante arrived to pick her up, she was greeted by the sight of a sleek black car parked at the curb. He stepped out wearing a tailored navy blazer, no tie, and an easy smile. "You look incredible," he said, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," Melissa replied, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. He opened the car door for her, earning a silent point in her mental scorecard. As they drove, Melissa tried to guess where he was taking her, but Dante only smirked and said, "Patience is a virtue." The car pulled up to a dimly lit street lined with brick buildings, their facades softened by string lights that glowed overhead. Dante parked in front of an unassuming door, the only clue to its purpose being the faint sound of jazz music drifting out as someone exited. "Here we are," he said, leading her inside. Melissa stepped into what could only be described as a hidden gem. The space was intimate, with exposed brick walls and soft amber lighting. A live jazz band played in the corner, the soulful notes of the saxophone filling the room. Couples sat at candlelit tables, leaning into quiet conversations. "I thought you might like this place," Dante said as they were shown to a table near the band. "It's one of my favorites. Great food, better vibes." Melissa looked around, impressed. "This is perfect. How did you find it?" "Years ago, a friend brought me here, and I've been coming ever since. Something about it feels timeless." As the evening unfolded, so did their conversation. Dante ordered a bottle of wine, and they shared plates of seared scallops, lamb chops, and a decadent chocolate souffle for dessert. "What's one thing you haven't done yet but always wanted to?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Melissa thought for a moment. "Travel. Not just vacations, but really experiencing a place, living like a local, immersing myself in the culture. Dante nodded. I get that. There's something about seeing the world through a different lens that changes you. What about you? She asked. I want to build something that lasts, he said. Not just in business, but in life, something meaningful. The intensity in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment she wondered if he could see through the walls she had carefully constructed. As the band played its final set, Dante extended his hand. Dance with me? Melissa hesitated. I'm not much of a dancer. I don't believe that for a second, he said, his grin infectious. She allowed him to lead her to the small dance floor, where he wrapped an arm around her waist and held her hand in his. The music was slow, sultry, and Melissa felt herself relax in his arms. You're full of surprises, she said softly. Stick around, he replied. There's more where that came from. When Dante walked her to her door later that night, the air between them felt charged with anticipation. I had a great time, Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. So did I, Dante replied. You're even more amazing than I thought. He leaned in, brushing a soft kiss on her cheek before stepping back. Good night, Melissa. As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it with a smile, feeling like she had just stepped into the first chapter of something extraordinary. The days that followed their first date were a whirlwind of anticipation. Dante wasn't just consistent. He was intentional. Each text, call, and date was a carefully curated moment, as if he were weaving a tapestry that spelled out his growing feelings for Melissa. Their second date was at an art gallery downtown, where Dante revealed a surprising appreciation for abstract art. Melissa teased him about his confident interpretations, but secretly she found it endearing. This one, he said, pointing to a painting of chaotic swirls in red and black, represents how passion and love can coexist with struggle. It's messy, but it works. Melissa smirked. And here I thought it was just an explosion of bad decisions. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that drew the attention of others in the room. See? That's why I need you around, to keep me humble. By the time they left the gallery, the conversation had shifted to their childhoods. Dante shared stories of summers spent with his grandmother, who taught him how to cook, while Melissa talked about her parents' unwavering support in her education. I think we owe a lot to the people who shape us, Dante said, his tone thoughtful. Melissa nodded. And we carry pieces of them with us, whether we realize it or not. As the evening wind brushed past them, Melissa felt her walls cracking, piece by piece. A month into their relationship, Dante surprised Melissa with a weekend getaway. She had no idea where they were headed until they pulled into the driveway of a luxurious lake house nestled among towering pines. Dante, this is... wow, Melissa said, stepping out of the car. I thought we could use a little escape, he said, grabbing their bags. Just us, the lake, and good food. The house was a dream. Wide windows overlooking the water, a cozy fireplace, and a spacious deck. That evening, Dante cooked dinner, grilled salmon with a side of roasted vegetables, and they ate on the deck under a sky full of stars. I could get used to this, Melissa said, sipping her wine. Good, Dante replied, his eyes locking onto hers. Because I don't plan on going anywhere. Her heart skipped a beat, but before she could respond, he stood and held out his hand. Come on. Melissa followed him down to the dock, where a small rowboat waited. You're kidding? She said, laughing. Trust me, he replied. They paddled out to the middle of the lake, the water still and glassy under the moonlight. Dante stopped rowing and leaned back, watching her. You know, Melissa, he began, his voice soft. When I met you, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted in life, but you've made me rethink everything." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "In a good way, I hope." "In the best way," he said. "You challenge me, you inspire me, and I want to keep showing up for you, however I can." Melissa felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. In that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, suspended in time. A short year later, Melissa woke up feeling queasy. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to stress, but when the symptoms persisted, she decided to take a pregnancy test. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, she stared at the small screen as it revealed 2 pink lines. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Later that evening, she invited Dante over for dinner, her nerves on edge. She had placed a tiny pair of baby shoes in a box and wrapped it with a bow, setting it on the coffee table. "What's this?" Dante asked, picking up the box as he sat down. "Open it," she said, her voice trembling. Dante untied the bow and lifted the lid. For a moment he stared at the shoes in silence. Then his eyes lit up. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. Dante broke into a wide grin, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We're having a baby?" "We are," she said, laughing through her tears. "That's the best news I've ever heard," he said, kissing her forehead. "Melissa, we're going to be amazing at this." Months passed, and Dante couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted to make their commitment official. Melissa had become his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word. Dante had been planning the proposal for weeks. He wanted it to be more than just memorable. He wanted it to reflect their love story in every detail. This wasn't about a grand gesture for show. It was about crafting a moment that Melissa would feel in her soul. He enlisted help from Melissa's closest friends and family, keeping everything a secret. He started with their first date location, a cozy jazz lounge tucked away in the heart of the city. But this time, he reserved the entire space for the evening. On the day of the proposal, Melissa had no idea what was in store. Dante had told her they were going to a couple's photo shoot to document her pregnancy, a suggestion she loved. "Make sure you wear something that makes you feel amazing," Dante had said, kissing her forehead that morning. She chose a flowing, blush-pink maternity dress that hugged her in all the right places, accentuating her baby bump. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was flawless yet understated. When Dante arrived to pick her up, he couldn't help but stare. "You're breathtaking," he said, his voice laced with admiration. "And you clean up pretty well yourself," she teased, noting his tailored charcoal suit. As they approached the jazz lounge, Melissa hesitated. "Wait, this looks familiar," she said, narrowing her eyes. Dante smiled but said nothing, instead taking her hand and leading her inside. The interior had been transformed. The intimate space was now adorned with candles, soft fairy lights, and arrangements of Melissa's favorite flowers, white lilies and blush roses. A small string quartet played in the corner, their gentle melody weaving through the air. "Dante," she whispered, her voice trembling as she took it all in. "Come on," he said, guiding her to a cozy spot near the stage where a photographer was waiting. They posed for photos, laughing and stealing glances at each other. They even took some maternity shots, Dante kneeling beside her bump and pressing a kiss to it. Melissa was so caught up in the moment that she didn't notice Dante's subtle signal to the photographer. As the photographer adjusted her lens, Dante took Melissa's hands, his expression suddenly serious. "Melissa," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "From the moment I met you, my life hasn't been the same. You've shown me what it means to love deeply, to dream bigger, and to be better, not just for myself but for us." Her breath hitched and tears began to pool in her eyes. "You've given me so much already. Your love, your trust, and now the gift of our child. And I know I want to spend the rest of my life giving you everything I have in return." Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. As he sank to one knee, Melissa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Melissa, will you marry me?" For a moment, she couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded vigorously, finally managing to choke out, "Yes, yes, Dante, I will." The room erupted in applause as the photographer captured the moment Dante slid the ring, a stunning cushion-cut diamond set in platinum, onto her finger. Dante stood, pulling Melissa into his arms as she sobbed against his chest. "You've made me the happiest man alive," he whispered into her hair. "And you've made me the happiest woman," she replied, her voice muffled but full of joy. As the night continued, they were joined by their closest friends and family who had been waiting in the back to celebrate. There was laughter, music, and champagne toasts, but the highlight of the evening was Melissa and Dante dancing together under the soft glow of the lights, holding each other like they were the only two people in the world. It was a night neither of them would ever forget, a perfect prelude to the life they were building together. 2 months later, Melissa and Dante sat hand in hand in the dimly lit ultrasound room. Melissa's belly had grown significantly, and she had started to feel the tiny flutters of life within her. "You ready for this?" Dante asked, his voice tinged with excitement. "As ready as I'll ever be," Melissa replied, squeezing his hand. The ultrasound technician entered, smiling warmly. "All right, let's see how your little one is doing." Melissa lay back as the technician applied the cool gel to her belly and began moving the transducer over her skin. The screen flickered, and soon, a grainy black and white image appeared. "There's your baby," the technician said, pointing to the screen. Melissa and Dante both leaned forward, their eyes wide with awe. "And there's your other baby," the technician added casually. "What?" Melissa's head whipped around to look at Dante, who was frozen, his jaw practically on the floor. "You're having twins," the technician confirmed, smiling at their stunned expressions. "A boy and a girl." Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes as she turned back to the screen. "Two babies? Oh my God, Dante!" Dante blinked, then broke into a wide grin. "Twins? A boy and a girl." He leaned down and kissed Melissa's forehead. "We're so blessed." The ride home from the doctor's office was filled with excited chatter. "Can you believe it?" Melissa said, resting a hand on her belly. "We're going to have a son and a daughter." "I can believe it," Dante said, glancing at her with a grin. "And I can't wait to meet them." Melissa laughed. "Well, you've got about 5 months to wait, so hold that thought." Dante's excitement bubbled over as soon as they reached home. "You know what we need to do? Baby shopping. Right now." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. We need to celebrate. Come on, let's go." An hour later, they were wandering through a baby store, overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. "Do we really need 2 of everything?" Dante asked, holding up a pair of tiny onesies. "Yes, and don't even think about getting them matching outfits all the time," Melissa said, laughing. "But look at these." Dante held up 2 identical onesies with King and Queen written on them. Melissa rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help but smile. "Okay, fine. Those are cute." They wandered through the aisles, picking out soft blankets, tiny socks, and a few gender-neutral items. Melissa held up a plush teddy bear and placed it in the cart. "For our baby girl." "And this?" Dante said, grabbing a stuffed lion. "For our little man." By the time they left the store, their cart was full and both of them were beaming. Later that evening, they sat on the couch surrounded by baby name books and notepads. "Okay," Melissa began, pen in hand. "Let's start with our son. What about Elijah?" Dante nodded thoughtfully. "Elijah's strong. I like it. What about Micah?" Micah's nice too." Melissa agreed, writing it down. They went back and forth for nearly an hour, debating names for their son. "Okay, so far we've got Elijah, Micah, and Isaiah for the boy," Melissa said. "Now what about our daughter?" "I like Eden," Dante said immediately. Melissa smiled. "Eden, that's beautiful." "Eden Grace," Dante added. Melissa's eyes lit up. "Eden Grace and Elijah Michael." "Perfect," Dante grinned, leaning over to kiss her. "Perfect, just like you." Melissa laughed. "You're biased." "Maybe," Dante admitted, "but I'm also right." As they settled back into the couch, the reality of their growing family began to sink in. In a few months, they'd have not one, but two little lives to love and nurture. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, they both felt ready to face it together. Melissa sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by magazines, swatches, and her ever-growing Pinterest board displayed on her laptop. Dante was sprawled on the couch, sipping on a soda, looking both amused and slightly overwhelmed. "All right," Melissa began, flipping through yet another wedding magazine. "Let's talk colors. I'm thinking blush pink, ivory, and gold. Classy, timeless, and romantic." Dante tilted his head, trying to envision it. "Yeah, I can see that, but can we throw in a pop of something bold, like a deep green?" Melissa looked up, surprised. "Deep green? Where did that come from?" He shrugged, grinning. "I saw a wedding on Instagram with some greenery. Looked cool." Melissa laughed, jotting it down. "Okay, Mr. Instagram Wedding Planner. We'll consider it." They spent the evening debating floral arrangements, cake flavors, and the perfect venue. Melissa wanted an outdoor ceremony under a canopy of trees, while Dante argued for a sleek ballroom with modern vibes. "How about both?" Dante suggested. "Ceremony outdoors, reception indoors. Best of both worlds." Melissa's face lit up. "That's actually perfect." Dante leaned back, folding his arms. "See, I'm good at this." A week later, Dante and Melissa were lured to Tasha's house under the pretense of a casual family dinner. "I don't know why Tasha's so insistent on us coming tonight," Melissa said as they walked up the driveway. "She knows we're swamped with wedding stuff." Dante smirked but said nothing, keeping a hand on the small of her back as they approached the door. When Tasha opened it, Melissa barely had time to register the wide grin on her friend's face before a chorus of voices shouted, "Surprise!" Melissa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The living room was decked out in pink, blue, and gold decorations, with balloons spelling out "baby shower" hovering above a table piled high with gifts. "You guys!" Melissa exclaimed, turning to look at Dante. He grinned. "I may have known about this." Melissa laughed, shaking her head as Tasha pulled her into a hug. The evening was filled with love, laughter, and more surprises. The games were the highlight of the night. First up was the diaper-changing race. Dante and Melissa were pitted against each other, tasked with changing diapers on baby dolls while blindfolded. "I've got this in the bag," Dante bragged, fumbling with the tiny Velcro straps. Melissa, however, worked swiftly and skillfully, finishing first. "I already have mom instincts," she teased, holding up her doll triumphantly. Dante groaned. "All right, you win this round." Another hit was the guessing game, where guests tried to figure out the size of Melissa's baby, bump by cutting lengths of ribbon. "Y'all better be careful guessing this," Melissa warned playfully. I'm hormonal and not afraid to call people out. As the evening wound down, Melissa and Dante sat together, opening gifts. There were adorable matching outfits for the twins, personalized blankets embroidered with Elijah and Eden, and an abundance of baby essentials. One gift in particular brought Melissa to tears. It was a scrapbook filled with photos, letters, and mementos from their family and friends, all expressing their love and excitement for the twins. "You guys didn't have to do this," Melissa said, her voice thick with emotion. Tasha smiled. "We wanted to. You two deserve all the happiness in the world." Dante wrapped an arm around Melissa, pulling her close. "This is incredible. Thank you, everyone." Later that night, as they lay in bed surrounded by a sea of baby gifts, Melissa turned to Dante. "Today was perfect," she said softly. Dante kissed her forehead. "It was, but you know what's even better?" "What?" "Knowing that in a few months we're going to meet the two little miracles that brought all this love into our lives." Melissa smiled, her heart full. "I can't wait." Melissa had always been a planner. From her career goals to the meticulous way she color-coded her closet, she thrived on structure, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the whirlwind that was becoming a new mother. The twins, Elijah and Eden, were everything she and Dante had hoped for and more. Elijah, with his dark, curious eyes, always seemed to be observing the world, while Eden's chubby cheeks and infectious giggle had already wrapped everyone around her tiny finger. But the reality of raising two infants at once was a shock to the system. "Did you sleep at all last night?" Melissa asked Dante one morning as she stood in the kitchen, hair tied in a messy bun and wearing a robe she hadn't changed out of in days. Dante groaned from the couch where he was bouncing Eden on his knee. "Sleep? What's that? Elijah had me up at 2 a.m. because he apparently hates the idea of sleeping like a normal baby." Melissa laughed, but it was tinged with exhaustion. "I think Eden thinks she's a night owl. She cried every time I tried to put her in the crib." As chaotic as their days and nights had become, there were moments that made it all worth it, like the first time Elijah managed to hold his bottle on his own, or the way Eden's tiny fingers would curl around Dante's thumb as if it were her lifeline. A few months into parenthood, Dante insisted on giving Melissa a break. "You've been doing so much," he said, setting a hand on her shoulder as she stood at the changing table. "You need a day to yourself." "And leave you with the twins? By yourself?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. Dante smirked. "Don't act like I don't know what I'm doing. I've got this. Go. Take the day." After much coaxing, Melissa finally agreed. She spent the day getting a massage, grabbing lunch with Tasha, and even taking a long nap, an absolute luxury. When she returned home that evening, she half expected to find chaos. Instead, she walked into a clean living room, the faint smell of dinner wafting through the air. Dante emerged from the kitchen, holding a spatula. "Welcome back, beautiful." Melissa blinked. "What is this? Did I come to the wrong house?" He laughed. "The twins are asleep, dinner's almost ready, and I even managed to fold the laundry. You're welcome." Melissa stared at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're a superhero, you know that?" "I just wanted to remind you that we're in this together," he said, pulling her into a hug. The weeks turned into months, and Melissa and Dante began to find their rhythm as parents. But they both felt the strain of their relationship taking a back seat to bottles, diapers, and sleepless nights. One evening, as they sat on the couch after putting the twins to bed, Melissa sighed. "Do you ever feel like we're just roommates now?" Dante frowned, setting down his glass of wine. "I've been thinking the same thing. We've been so focused on the twins, we've forgotten about us." Melissa nodded, her throat tightening. "I don't want to lose what we have, Dante." "You won't." he said firmly. We won't. I promise. The next weekend, Dante surprised her again. This time, he arranged for his mother to babysit the twins and took Melissa out for their first date night since becoming parents. He brought her to the rooftop of an upscale restaurant where soft music played and the city skyline sparkled in the distance. Dante, Melissa said as they sat down, this is beautiful. You deserve it, he replied. As they talked and laughed over dinner, Melissa felt the tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying start to melt away. Thank you, she said softly as they shared a slice of cheesecake for dessert. For what? For not letting us forget about this. About us. Dante reached across the table, taking her hand. You're my everything, Melissa. The twins are family. It all starts with us, and I'll never let us lose that. Melissa and Dante pulled up in front of their home, the quiet hum of the engine fading as Dante turned off the car. The night was warm, and the windows were cracked open just enough to let the cool evening breeze drift in. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated the inside of the car, where the couple sat comfortably, their bellies full from the evening's dinner. Dante leaned over to the center console and fiddled with the radio. A classic 90s slow jams filled the car, setting the perfect vibe. Melissa smiled as the first chords of Boyz II Men's I'll Make Love to You played. Now this is the kind of music that made you fall in love with me, Dante said, smirking. Melissa laughed, swaying gently to the music. Oh, is that what you think? Please, it's your charm and that cologne you always wear. The music was just a bonus. They sat in the car, reminiscing about high school days and past antics. After a few songs, Dante turned to Melissa with a playful grin. All right, he said, rubbing his hands together. Let's play a game. What's one crazy thing you did in high school that nobody knows about? Melissa raised an eyebrow. Nobody? Not even my best friend? Not even them, Dante clarified. Melissa thought for a moment, biting her lip as she tried to suppress a mischievous grin. Okay, she said, leaning back in her seat. So one Saturday, I stayed over at one of my girlfriend's houses. Dante nodded, intrigued. Go on. Melissa smirked, her eyes gleaming. We ended up kissing. Dante's jaw dropped slightly. Wait, what? Melissa laughed, enjoying his reaction. That's not all. After the kiss, one thing led to another and, well, let's just say we ate more than snacks that night. Dante's eyes widened, and then he burst into laughter. You're telling me you and your friend... Melissa nodded, joining him in laughter. Yup, and nobody knows. Not a soul. Dante wiped tears from his eyes as his laughter subsided. Melissa, you're full of surprises. So, He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You ever think about doing it again? You know, for research purposes? Maybe I could supervise. Melissa rolled her eyes, chuckling. Boy, please, let's see how this wedding goes first. Then we'll talk. Dante laughed, shaking his head. Fair enough. Your turn to ask me now. Melissa shifted in her seat, turning to face him fully. All right, what's one crazy thing you did in high school that nobody knows about? Dante's smile faltered slightly and he hesitated. He looked away, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. What is it? Melissa asked, her tone soft but curious. Dante exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. All right, but you've got to promise not to freak out. Melissa raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. I'm not promising anything, just spill. Dante hesitated again before finally speaking. Okay, there was this one time. I kissed a boy. Melissa blinked, her expression unreadable. A boy? Yeah, Dante admitted, his voice quieter now. We were messing around at a party, didn't think much of it, but then I kinda got turned on. He cleared his throat, and I gave him a hand job. The air in the car grew thick with tension. Melissa stared at him, her face a mix of shock, confusion, and something Dante couldn't quite place. Melissa, he began, but she held up a hand. She sat back, crossing her arms, her gaze hard and unrelenting. Her jaw clenched slightly as she stared at him, and her silence felt heavier than any words she could have said. Look, Dante said cautiously. It was a one-time thing. I was young, curious, and figuring things out. It didn't mean anything, and it's not who I am now. Melissa finally spoke, her voice low and steady. And you waited until now to tell me this? After all this time? I didn't think it mattered, Dante said, trying to explain. It was years ago. I didn't know it would. Melissa cut him off with a sharp look. Dante, I don't even know what to say right now. She shook her head, her glare intensifying. You've got me sitting here wondering what else I don't know about you. Dante reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away. Melissa, come on, don't let this change how you see me. I love you. This doesn't change that. Melissa stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. Finally, she turned away, her eyes focused out the window. I just need to think, she said quietly. Dante sat back in his seat, his heart sinking. The night, which had started with laughter and love, now hung heavy with uncertainty. The tension in the car was palpable. Melissa sat in silence, staring out of the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Dante ran his hand over his face, his frustration building as the minutes dragged on. Finally, he exhaled sharply and broke the silence. Oh, so it's cool for you to just eat random girls out, but my one single experimental experience is frowned upon? Really, Melissa? She whipped her head around to face him, her glare sharp. Excuse me? Dante turned to her, his voice steady but tinged with hurt. You heard me. You just told me you had an experimental experience with your friend, and I laughed about it, even joked with you. But when I tell you something similar, suddenly it's this huge problem. What's the difference? Is it because I'm a man? What, you think I'm gay now? Melissa opened her mouth to respond but hesitated. Dante took the opportunity to continue. Let me break it down for you, he said, his tone firm. Since I'm a man, I don't get to experiment with the things I'm curious about without being judged. That's such a double standard, Melissa. You told me about your little sleepover moment, and I laughed. I supported you. I didn't sit here and question everything about you. But now that it's my turn, you're sitting there looking at me like I betrayed you. Melissa shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. Dante, it's not the same. How is it not the same? He challenged, leaning toward her. Explain it to me. She hesitated, searching for words. It just feels different. You're supposed to be this strong, confident man. And now I'm finding out. Finding out what? Dante pressed, his voice rising slightly. That I'm human. That I had one moment in my teenage years where I tried to figure something out about myself. It didn't mean anything, Melissa. It was curiosity. And you know what? I never did it again because I realized it wasn't for me. Melissa's glare softened slightly, but her expression remained guarded. And let me remind you, Dante continued, his tone softening just a bit. I didn't judge you. I didn't question you. I didn't make you feel small. I celebrated the fact that you trusted me enough to share something personal with me. But now, here I am, being honest with you, and you're ready to leave me over it? Melissa's lips parted, as if to argue, but no words came out. Dante leaned back in his seat, shaking his head. I thought we were better than this. I thought we had the kind of relationship where we could tell each other anything without fear of being judged. Was I wrong?" Melissa looked down at her hands, her thoughts swirling. She hated the way his words made sense, hated that he was calling her out on something she hadn't fully considered. I wasn't expecting it," she admitted quietly. Dante nodded. "Neither was I, Melissa. But here we are, and I need to know, are you going to hold this against me, or can we move past it?" Melissa's mind raced. She thought about everything they had built together, everything they had shared. Dante's question lingered in the air. "Can we move past it?" Melissa sat still, her hands gripping her lap tightly. She bit her bottom lip and looked away for a moment before finally turning back to him. Her eyes held a mix of uncertainty and a sharp edge that Dante hadn't seen before. Finally, she spoke up. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice steady but laced with doubt. Dante's brow furrowed, his heart sinking. "You don't know?" Melissa exhaled slowly, her gaze piercing. "I don't know if we can move past this, Dante. I don't know if I can. I love you, but it's different. I look at you differently now." "What does that even mean?" Dante asked, his voice tight with frustration. She shook her head, struggling to find the right words. "It means I don't think I want my son raised by a man who likes men." The words hit Dante like a punch to the gut. He stared at her in disbelief, the weight of her statement crashing down on him. "Are you fucking serious right now, Melissa?" She didn't flinch, meeting his gaze head on. "You know what?" Dante said, his voice rising, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "That's some bullshit. First of all, I never said I like men. I told you about one moment in my life, a teenage experiment that I never repeated. And now you're ready to rewrite my entire identity?" Melissa remained silent, her expression unreadable. Dante leaned forward, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady himself. "And this whole, you look at me differently thing? That's rich, Melissa. Real rich. You sat here and laughed about your little sleepover moment, but the second I tell you something vulnerable, you throw it in my face. How is that fair?" "It's different," she snapped, her voice shaking. "How?" Dante demanded, his voice cracking with anger. "Because I'm a man? Because I'm supposed to fit into some perfect little box of what you think masculinity is?" "Newsflash, Melissa. I'm the same man I was 10 minutes ago before I told you. The same man you love. The same man you're building a life with." Melissa's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. "I don't know if I can trust that anymore." Dante's jaw tightened, and he slammed his hand on the dashboard, the sound echoing in the confined space of the car. "You don't know if you can trust me? Over what? A damn kiss that happened over a decade ago?" Melissa flinched slightly at his outburst, but didn't back down. "I'm thinking about our future, Dante," she said firmly. "About our kids, about our son. I don't want him to grow up confused or questioning his father's identity." Dante let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Wow. So now you're worried about our son? Melissa, our son, hell, our kids, are going to grow up in a home full of love and respect because that's what I'm about. Not some bullshit labels you're trying to slap on me because of your own insecurities." Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. Dante leaned back in his seat, his chest rising and falling as he tried to control his breathing. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice quieter now but still sharp. "I thought we were partners. I thought we had each other's backs. But the second I share something vulnerable with you, you use it to tear me down. That's not love, Melissa." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to cry. "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante shook his head, laughing bitterly. "Take all the time you need, but let me tell you something, Melissa. If you can't see me for who I am, if you can't accept the man who's been by your side through everything, then maybe you're not the person I thought you were either." The silence that followed was deafening. Neither of them moved, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Dante opened the car door and stepped out, slamming it shut behind him. He walked toward the house, leaving Melissa sitting in the car, her mind racing and her heart heavy. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom window, casting long shadows across the room. Dante stirred awake, his body heavy with exhaustion. The previous night's argument still lingered in his mind, the words replaying like a broken record. He rolled over, reaching out instinctively for Melissa, but his hand met only the cool, empty sheets. "Melissa!" he called out groggily, sitting up. The house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Normally the twins' laughter or cries would echo through the walls by now, but there was nothing. Just silence. Dante rubbed his face, shaking off the remnants of sleep, and climbed out of bed. He walked into the twins' nursery, his heart sinking when he saw their cribs empty. The room looked oddly bare. Some of the toys, clothes, and even the framed pictures were gone. "Melissa!" he called out louder, panic beginning to creep into his voice. He checked the kitchen, the living room, and every other corner of the house, but there was no sign of her or the twins. Her clothes, shoes, and toiletries were missing too. His chest tightened as the reality hit him like a ton of bricks. She was gone. Dante grabbed his phone and dialed Melissa's number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Frustration and fear clawed at him as he paced the living room. "Melissa, pick up the phone," he muttered under his breath, dialing her number yet again. After 5 unsuccessful attempts, he tried her parents. "Hey, Mr. Evans," Dante said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Have you seen Melissa? She's not here and I can't reach her." There was a long pause on the other end before her father replied, his voice neutral. "No, Dante, we haven't seen her." "What about the twins? Have you heard from her at all?" "No, we haven't." Dante's grip on the phone tightened. "If you hear from her, can you tell her to call me?" "Of course," Mr. Evans said before hanging up. Dante immediately called Melissa's best friend, Tasha, next. If anyone knew where she was, it would be her. "Tasha, it's Dante. Do you know where Melissa is? She left with the twins and I can't get a hold of her." Tasha sighed heavily. "I haven't seen her, Dante." "You sure?" "Because this doesn't make sense. She wouldn't just leave like this without saying something." "I don't know what to tell you," Tasha replied, her voice unusually distant. "But if I hear from her, I'll let you know." Dante ended the call and slumped onto the couch, his head in his hands. His mind raced with questions and scenarios. Did Melissa go to a hotel? Was she staying with friends? Was she really done with him, or was this just some kind of dramatic stunt? He thought about last night's conversation, replaying every word. Was that really enough for her to leave, to take the twins and disappear? His heart ached at the thought of losing them, his family, his future. Dante stared at his phone, willing it to ring, but the screen remained dark. After a few more moments of agonizing silence, he stood up, his resolve hardening. "She can't just do this," he muttered to himself. He grabbed a pen and paper and began jotting down a list of people to call, places to check, and steps to take. His love for Melissa was deep, but so was his frustration. He couldn't sit and wait for answers. He needed to act. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the house in light, Dante sat at the table, staring at the empty seat where Melissa used to sit. He was alone now, with nothing but questions and an uncertain path ahead.